All right, so our next speaker is Peter Peerman. He is a CTO at Lively. Lively is a company which I, from the forward, would very much like to do a project with, and we have been wanting to do that for some time and still haven't come to it. I hope that it will soon. One of the reasons is Peter, of course, but it's also because of the cool technology that they're working with, that they're building their APIs with. We mainly do front end. They do a lot of cool things with GraphQL. And since we haven't been able to do the project yet, I figured it would be very nice if Peter could at least share everything with us. So maybe it's just for me, but I hope you also enjoy the stuff.
Right. Thank you all for having me on this fine night. Thank you for inviting me at the forum. My name is Peter Peerman, and as said before, technology lead at Lively. Just a little bit of background. We're a software agency building products, and we do this from basically the business concept to the designs, wireframes, development, DevOps, and iterations further on. So basically just full stack development. We do this with 19 people, and we're at the Westpoort near East Laterweg. And we create a lot of cool web applications using new technology. And tonight I'm going to speak to you about our experience with GraphQL. And maybe just a little bit of context. We build big full stack apps for our clients. We'll mainly focus on the technology side today. So maybe a little bit of our stack history. I found it very interesting in the previous talk. We're also talking about WebSockets, and we've done we've seen a lot of different protocols and things for this as well. So maybe just a little brief history of our stack, so you know a little bit that we know our thing or two about crazy APIs. So we started 5 years ago with just a PHP, REST, Angular 1. Then we moved to Node to get more of alignment between the front-end and back-end team. Still did REST, still Angular. And we switched to Meteor. We did a couple of big projects. Interested to see how many people know Meteor.js? That's good. Okay, so it's a full stack JavaScript framework where you can but the data is shared through WebSockets. So you have real-time data basically always. And it used Blaze before React was cool. So then we did a project actually in GraphQL and React, which was our first introduction in GraphQL, and it worked out like really well. The team from Meteor is also heavily supporting the whole GraphQL movement, and basically most of the Meteor team is now switching to the Apollo project, which I'm also going to talk about. It's a big proponent of the GraphQL app system. And then we went full circle. We went back to NodeJS. So now we have just the bare NodeJS with GraphQL and React on the front end and React Native for the mobile apps. It's just a little bit of background. So yeah, we've got some experience with non-standard APIs and also convincing customers and other relations that you should not be scared of this. Just try it out. Just go with it. And see the benefits. So maybe I could talk a little bit about the difference between REST and GraphQL. And I would like to see this from a perspective like back in the days. We all remember this, right? Back in the day, we wanted to be as RESTful as possible. So who here had issues stuffing some functionality into a REST API that didn't make it REST anymore? That's basically all hands raising. So yeah, it had some problems as well if you wanted to create nice front ends, right? So if you look at embedded queries of embedded data in your queries, it's always a bit of a hack. There's not really a RESTful way of doing proper embedding in your queries, and you use these parameter hacks to say, well, embed the avatar from my use profile is yes, and then if we embed the data, this kind of thing was ugly. linking entities together. They used the link tag sometime, but it also didn't really work for me, so it was just be another post call to, I don't know, link something, send an ID, also not that RESTful. Entity-less methods with side effects was also a problem, so you just wanted to do something in the system. Well, there's not really an entity connected to the thing that you're doing, so you just create like /API/do something and then put a post to it, and it's not RESTful anymore. Documentation, question mark, so I mean, struggle was okay, and still is okay, but you need to have a team that's like disciplined enough to actually fill in all the keywords, right? And sometimes people are lacking in this, or well, not feeling like filling out all the parameters, which makes it a hassle to work with this project. And versioning, of course, is also a nice challenge, and I think, well, GraphQL hasn't really solved this per se, but it has a nice approach to how you can solve this. So GraphQL question mark. So how many people here already know what GraphQL is and exactly how it works?
Exactly how it works.
Okay, so that's a good thing. It's about half the people raising their hands. So it's a good thing I have a little bit of an introduction for it, because we're on a front-end meetup. So maybe for the back-end people, it's all cookie cutter stuff, but still want to introduce this. So if people ask me what GraphQL is, I tend to describe it as a query language for APIs. And people who know databases always go like crazy. It's like, oh, you can query everything from my database. And what about security and authorization? Well, there's solutions for all of this. But it's nice to have this language of speaking to your API, like REST. So when you're talking REST to a server, you know, /API/users is going to give me a list. And if I /users/the ID of one of the users, it's going to give me the specific user. And that's really nice because everyone does the same pattern. And GraphQL helps you to make this API even more strict, so you know exactly what is possible inside your API. Just a quick look back on how the olden days used to work. So imagine that we're building a page and we want to show a user profile, for instance. We want to show some blog posts of this user, and we want to show the followers from a user. So what we would usually do, or what we previously did, is we have a nice REST API with /users. We would get a certain user, then we would send a second REST request, because we did such a nice REST API that all the entities are nice and separated. We request so we got the user, so we know the ID, so we can use the ID for getting the posts, so user ID/posts, and then afterwards we can get the followers from the users. So basically we had one page where it showed this 3 bits of information, and we had to do 3 REST calls to actually get this. And that's possible, but sometimes you have a very fancy screen, and sometimes then the amount of REST calls starts to explode because you want to do things all over the place. And also on mobile, you need to do multiple round trips to the server, which has the same latency for each of these calls. So it's problems we need to deal with. So in comes GraphQL and its mighty power of doing a query. So what actually happens is that for the same case, there's one request being made. It's a post request to /GraphQL. So instead of having the entities in your URL, you're just posting to one endpoint, API/GraphQL, and you're sending a query. So you're actually sending a query, and you're saying, I want to request a user with this ID. I want to see its name, but I also want to see the linked posts of this user. And from this post, I only want the title. And that's also an interesting part, because in REST, usually you get the post and you just get all of the data, right? Even though your mobile app may only be using the title. And then, of course, you can build these hacks and say, well, parameter only show, or filter, and just only show the title. It's all possible, but here it's all baked into the query language itself. So, and not only do we request the post, but we also request the followers from this user, with the parameter being only the last 3, or maybe the last 5, or that's the way that you're allowed to pass parameters to a certain query. And then you get back one big chunk. So it doesn't show what's happening on the back end. But of course, all this data needs to be queried from the database. So basically, all the fields have their own resolvers, the methods that actually retrieve this data. And it might actually be possible that all of this data is being retrieved from a REST API. So you go to the server, and there's actually 3 REST calls being made to get this data. But at least the client only sends one request to the server and gets back this whole bundled package back with just the data that you need in your view. So you can see this data coming back. It has the user with the name and the posts and the followers containing only the information that you really want to see. Maybe this is starting to get a little bit clearer. Yeah, then we just went for it. So basically, this technology came around, and the Meteor team was really excited about this, and we were big fans of the Meteor team. They're really forward thinkers. Yeah, they thought of this whole WebSocket protocol and tried to introduce this, and I also tried to help to make this more of a protocol. So if you're using this WebRTC thing, please don't invent your own protocol, but look at the ones that are already there. Yeah. But we just went for it in one of the projects because we really believed in this paradigm, and we thought that it would make the life of both backend and frontenders a lot nicer. I'm going to try to convince you why this went, but we just went for it. The technology is from Facebook, so they were using it, of course. But at the moment that GitHub released their API, I was like, thanks guys. So wipe the sweat off my head, so I know that there's more people actually going to use it in real life. So I put a couple of these on there. There's a lot of people using it, but these are the names that everyone wants to see, of course. Facebook, GitHub has a public API that's now in GraphQL. Airbnb is using it. Shopify is using it, also in their public APIs. And there's a lot of companies in Holland. Well, not a lot, but there's a couple of big companies like KLM and Binder startup also using this technology now in their production stuff. So it's just a nice confirmation of people that see some future in this technology without instead of just sticking to REST and not looking into this. All right. So maybe I can start with a little demo, which is of course always exciting, but we'll see how this goes. So I'm going to open the GraphQL interface. And one thing to note that the Meteor team learned from their experience with introducing a new protocol was that the tooling to use this new protocol is essential for the fact that people are going to use it. So what they did differently from DBP now with GraphQL, well, Facebook did it, of course, but they are also helping this, is that they made this tool, which is called GraphQL, like the interface for GraphQL, which is this editor. If you create a GraphQL server and you say GraphQL enabled true, then you get this for free inside your API. So usually in our production environments, we do not enable it. And this is like a, how do you say this, a web app inside a Chrome app. So you can actually have multiple tabs open and save some queries and save your authentication headers and all this kind of thing. So I won't bother you with this, but basically from the line here down, it's the thing that you get for free with every GraphQL server you create. Well, this thing is super cool. So maybe I asked before, who knows what GraphQL is? Who already has seen this graphical interface? Okay, that's good. I'm going to show it for the rest because it's just so freaking awesome. Okay, so imagine there's actually a big application behind this, and I'm not. And later I'm going to show some screens of this as well. But imagine we have a language institute, and this language institute links people looking for inburgeringscursus or a language course, and plans these at a certain location with a certain lecturer. And there's all kind of things that need to happen to make these people come together and have it be a very good course. So that's the case for this API, and it's gone pretty huge. It's one one of our favorite projects, so I always love to talk about it as well. But we're just going to look at the API now. So what you're seeing here on the left is actually the place where we construct this query that we've seen before. So the cool part is, I don't know what to type now at this moment because I'm talking, and I can always just autocomplete. So I just press Control Spacebar, and I can exactly see what I'm able to do. So we're going to create a query, for instance, and then I'm going to autocomplete again. Is this visible for everyone?
And maybe you can move the comments. Yeah, there.
Yeah, better?
Yeah.
Okay. Looking at everyone. So what you can see here is all of the queries that are available. So we see some addresses, some exams, info, invoices, modules, users. So for instance, we're going to look at maybe something that's not that privacy sensitive, course materials. All right. So we have course materials. And we again look at what's in there. So we can say maybe we create a little mobile app that will just show people all of the course materials. So we fill in the name and we do the request, and we hope our authentication still works, and it does. So at the right side, you can now see all of the course materials that are available in the API, neatly wrapped in one piece of response. And maybe this list is a bit long, so we're going to pass some parameters. And also for these parameters, you can see exactly the parameters that are available. So there's a limit there, so probably this will limit it to 3, and that's nice. But maybe this mobile app that we create, we also want to show something other on the first dashboard screen, for instance. So we can just add stuff to this query. So maybe we can look into some groups. And here's where the fun starts, because a group, of course, has linked entities as well. So if we look at the group, we could, for instance, see the learner users. So this would be the people who are actually following the course. And from these users, we can look at their user, and might not show their names, but show their IDs. Then it's not that bad. And I'm not going to press play now. Does someone know what's going to happen if I press play now? All of the users with all of the students will be fetched in one big reply. So I did this earlier today, so I'm not going to do it before. So I'm just going to limit the number of groups that I'm going to return, and I hope that there's some learners inside the first 5 groups. So we can actually see that from the last 5 groups, the first 2 groups have no users. But the third group has 1 user with this ID in it. So you can already see that one of the super cool things of this is that the way that you design your front-end application is completely separated from how the backender implements your entities. So, for instance, you might have an interface that will only show the ID or show the ID and an avatar image, and you don't have to hassle backender to create some parameters to only show this data, which is super cool. I'm just going to go back to this example to see if I didn't miss something. Yeah. So that's this thing. So that's pretty awesome. So you can do the auto completion, but on the right side you also have the documentation. So here you can see what's all possible. So we have how do you say this? The queries, and we can actually see from the groups. For instance, we can see all the parameters that are available, and also the type that they expect. So you know exactly what you need to pass. And it's also just not possible to create a GraphQL query with parameters that are wrong. It will just say this needs to be an int. I cannot send a string because it says I need to find an int. So it helps you also create these queries, which is pretty cool. Yes, and then for the mutation, I'm just going to go to this tab, so I don't want to screw up this mutation, but it's similar. So the query would be all getting information, and mutation would be, well, basically maybe for the old school people would be a remote procedure call in a way. So you can define your own. How do you say this? Mutations, and we have created some kind of a namespace, so you know user underscore means it's probably going to do something with the user's entity, and it's going to create a user.
Would it be more like a post or is it?
It's all post. So
Yeah,
both the gets
yeah.
are post and the mutations are also post.
When you compare it to an RPC call,
Yes.
wouldn't it be more like a post call? A traditional post call to add something, or is it?
No, it just posts to the GraphQL endpoint and you send it this query. And in the query it says mutation, so you're going into this mutation namespace. And you say, I want to create a user. And here you can also say, I want to create a user. And when I have created this user, I can specify what I want to get back. So I can, for instance, say, so if you have a model which says this person was added to the API, you could also get back its profile and then its surname, for instance. So now we're going to look at, so we say we pass a user to this user create, and it has the input type user. And just imagine this from a front-end perspective, you're just being helped, like how is this API working? So I already filled some stuff in here. I will probably create another user called Peter2 at lively.nl. I'm going to say that the type is a learner, and I'm going to have a different surname, Peter2. And when I send this thing, it says that I'm unauthenticated because it did not add added the headers. I'm not going to hassle this for the moment, but then you would get back precisely the surname of this newly added user.
What will happen to all the properties that are modeled but you don't set? So, for instance, you didn't add a street address.
So, if we look at the mutation, users create users. Create. Users create. We have an input type, and then it would show. So for in this instance, we would say string and then a profile. Just looking at this second, so you can specify which ones are required.
Yeah. Okay. And then they would be either nil or empty string.
Yeah.
Or zero.
Yeah. If you don't send them, it will not save them in this case. So, but what's also nice is that if you're creating this post. You can also in this data field find out the stuff that you can actually send to this API because it was defined that it is a user object. So you could also immediately already got this over here. But you could, for instance, also like nested properties say which gender or your date of birth and can immediately post it on the first creation.
This is also the mutations also work with blobs or document types or images or that type of stuff?
That's a good question. So the question is, does this also work with images and file uploads? And of course, this is a little bit more difficult. What you could do is just base 64 your stuff and send it over JSON, but we don't really like that. So what we did is create some middleware that you just do a normal multi-part form post or binary upload to the GraphQL endpoint, and it will see the middleware will see that there's a file being posted, and it will let GraphQL know that there's also a file available. And then within the resolver of the mutation, you can just retrieve the file and handle it as you would with just a normal upload.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. So where was I going with this? This was the first demo. So okay, one down. So a couple of the highlights that we saw. We have a typed auto-documented API, and I want to stress this again: auto-documented, because you need to define these types. So yes, there's a lot of boilerplate that you have to do this. You have to define all these input types and stuff. But because you've defined this, it's also you're also able to validate this, so you know for sure that someone cannot send a string where you request an integer, and it's auto documented, so you don't need to give any how do you say this docs like JS docs, JS docs that you're going to forget to add anyway because it's just comments, it's all in code. So if you define the type, then it's also documented. Linked data hydration by default. So this means that you're always able to get linked data from an entity, even though this might not be implemented with your REST alternative. So you could go a lot deeper, like we did before. We just went from groups to learners, and you could, for inside your user, you could also maybe request the groups that the user is in. You can infinitely go deeper and then blow up your system. But this gives you a lot of flexibility with which data you want to hydrate. And there's also, maybe a side note, a lot of performance problems, of course, with hydrating like a lot of data. And we did a meetup talk about how we optimize this on the database layer. So we actually linked some MySQL or Postgres tables preemptively, which just made the database call just one call instead of doing 10 calls to get one result. You can view this on our YouTube page from there. All right, so you can do versioning, which is also cool by replacing or deprecating fields. So you can imagine if you have a mobile app and it's using one of the query entry points, you can create a new query entry point with different kind of data, and you can just leave the old one in there and still have it work on your mobile device, and change your API on a field level instead of like prefixing it with v1 and then needing to upgrade your mobile app to v2 before it can use these new features. That's it's just a different way of looking at it. Of course, you still need to maintain your old fields, but at least you just have one API, and you can easily see the versions that are available from any consuming application. All right, so easily consolidate microservices and legacy into one API, and this is where GraphQL really shines for us. We do a lot of client work, and of course, it's not always completely greenfield. There's of course also some REST APIs already existing, or there's some SOAP APIs even, or some data bus that you want to connect to, or maybe you have different systems, and GraphQL doesn't really care where the data comes from. So GraphQL in the end, say you request the user field in the node backend, it will just call or create a resolve method, and it just doesn't care how you get this data as long as you return the type that you promised to return. So you could write a stub, just put in a JSON file inside the route, but you could also request some old SOAP API, get some XML, turn it around, make a nice, neat JSON format from it, and then put it back. So it might be possible that this query that we created actually questions all kinds of different APIs and consolidates all this data. Which is real nice, because then you have one access layer to all of your different microservices or legacy architecture. And there's more, of course. And I'll continue on the next slide. It's great collaboration between the front end and back end. This was one of the things that I was really happy with to see happening. So documentation and handover is of course handled very nicely. We work with front end and back end within our company a lot, but sometimes we also work with other companies that do the front end, or other companies that only do the back end. And then having like this API that you can actually query and fiddle around with as living documentation is really nice. What we also see is that we have people that are specialized in front end that do not per se do a lot of back end, but because it's all JavaScript and they use the GraphQL API, sometimes the front end team also is able to create some stubs for a certain query or some mutation that doesn't exist yet. But this provides a great entry point for someone who's more proficient in the backend to implement this backend call, or at least have a discussion about what it looks like and what's possible within the data structure. And we've seen this really helps the front-end team and back-end team come closer together. Then we have the Apollo client for data management and caching. I'm going to show you all about this in a second. So it's not just you having to create exactly this whole how do you say, this HTTP call and manage this data yourself. There's a nice abstraction for this. I'm going to show this at this second. So I promised you a little bit of a detail of what the application that we were looking at before would look like. So maybe a little bit small, but what you can see over here is the interface for this Language Institute tool that we use, that we created. So you can see a table over here with all kinds of records, and we have this big ass filter over here, where we have several entities being pre-filled, being requested to enable a pre-fill over here. So you have organizations, you have groups, and you have modules over here that are all coming from a database. So if you would do this in a REST kind of way, it would be 1, 2, I think this is also a database of 3, 4 calls to just populate the filter options. And you only want to have the name and the ID, of course, of the thing that you're filtering for. Okay, so we're going into some code. See if I can still find it. So you have to bear with me with this white Vim theme because my black theme didn't look that well. And we're not going into this project, but in this project. So we're diving a little bit deep here. We're using React and we're using Apollo, but we also created some abstractions for Apollo. But I just want to show you what the screen that you just saw would look like for us at this moment. So bear with me while we're moving through here. So at the bottom, we see create learners export file mutation. So this is describing how this mutation would look like, but I'm just going to go up a little bit because we're talking about the filter suggestions. So what we can see in this file, and maybe to get a little bit of context, we're in the user pages, the Cosisto or learners, and we're in the master page, which shows all of the records. We're in an index file. And at the bottom, we've defined our GraphQL query. So you can see that this query that we're going to perform, it's kind of like a prepared statement almost. You write the query that you created in GraphQL. That's usually the workflow. So frontender creates the query they want in GraphQL, and then copy paste this whole query, and then just paste it in the React file over here. So we create a query, we get some organizations, we create requests for groups. We sort them. We sort them by name because we want the filter to be sorted, of course. And we say we only want the name and the ID for these entities. And yeah, that's a lot of data from different entities, and this is retrieved as one big data package. Then what happens with this thing? So I won't get completely into the details, but we have a fetcher abstraction, which means we create a new fetcher. We basically pass the query, and we pass it an on-change method. And the fetcher takes care of when this component is rendered. You look at all the fetchers, it will do all the GraphQL queries, will get the data back, and it will populate the data inside the properties of this module. So that's quite the abstraction. But really nice if you're used to this and just want to create a data-filled component really quickly. So we have a force update over here, and then if we look at the render function, who here knows React? Okay, that's good. So sorry for the people that are not that proficient in React. We need to plow through here. Okay, so we have a render function over here. And here we can see, well, there's an infinite scroll, there's a header, there's a content view. Inside the content view, we have the action bar, and we're going to look at the action bar at this instance. So if I look what the action bar is, we render this. We have const has filters. We create an action bar. We get the buttons, and we create a drawer over here. And if we look at the drawer, it's also another function. And then we look at this const over here, and here we can actually see this dot filter suggestions fetcher that will actually present the data to this component. And then these things are how to say this, are created into variables. So we see the things that we retrieved earlier in the mutation, we see back over here. So if you would inspect this, you would see the filter params. You would see that it contains groups, organizations, modules, and locations, and only has the name there. And then we render some fields, and inside the fields is a tag picker, and it has default value. Let's see where the value is. Change. Oh, it's over here. So you can see it's the plaats with a certain option, and that's the result of this map over here. So that's how the data gets into the React component in the end. I'm sorry if this was a little bit of a deep dive. I'll go back to my presentation. Phew. All right, that's 2 down. Yes, now I hope that I've shown everything for the client code takeaway. We'll see. So we've seen how we can bind GraphQL data to front-end components, at least in this completely abstracted way. And we can see how we did the mutations over there. Yeah, I could go into this, but maybe it makes more sense to jump into the. I'll get into the mutations in the little bit easier example. It's more overview.
Do you also have some experience with mobile applications, like native application code, GraphQL clients or something like that?
So we have quite some experience with React Native, which is the same paradigm as React, but then cross-platform for iOS and Android applications. And we actually use the same Apollo client inside the React Native application, and that works like a charm. So it's the paradigm is exactly the same as on web, which means that all the people with JavaScript expertise at our company can create a mobile app the same way that they would with a web application. That's just I can recommend this to everyone. It's really great. No native code at all. Yeah, we just use the components that are there, and we can create excellent applications with this. All right. So this was great. Now show me something even fancier. So we're going to look into some advanced features of Apollo. Some of these features we use, and some of these we don't. But there's a lot of nice little nuggets in there that I really want to share with you. So introducing Apollo. So you can see Apollo as this sort of service that you give it a GraphQL query, and it spits back the data, but in between it does all these cool caching things and options to refetch stuff, and well, the things that I'm going to show on the slide now. So one of these is the watch query, which is really cool. So this might be a topic maybe for the next one. I can force myself to actually dive into this and get to the details of it. But we'll get into that later. So the idea of a GraphQL subscription is that you, instead of just doing a request response to get the data back once, you say, I want to perform this query, and when something changes that I requested in this query, I want to know about it, so I can update the data and only get the incremental changes from the subscription. That's possible to do in Apollo with GraphQL subscriptions. Then we have a poll interval, which is like the poor man's way of doing this. You can just you can specify the interval at which a component will refetch its data, which is nice because you don't have to do the timeout thing yourself and get the data again. It's just handled by the Apollo layer. We can do prefetch, which I actually just recently found out that it's possible. That for instance, if you're hovering over a navigation item or over a certain user before clicking it, Apollo is able to prefetch the data that will be behind, so that the component that will be behind this piece of data. So when you then click it, when you've made up your mind and you click it, then the data is already there and will show up immediately, which is blows my mind. Okay. Notify a network status change. I found it funny to put this in because people at the Voorhoede, and I can already see Declan smiling, are doing a lot of things with offline applications as well. So this means that you can do certain things with your data when you detect that you've gone offline. So maybe you want to keep the certain data in your view, and for other pieces of data you want to say, you've gone offline, please reconnect, or else this feature won't work properly. so you can implement these as well. You can do a fetch more. So pagination is this is the first time that I've done done pagination, which is not a drag and is not a big pain. So doing the infinite scrolls and doing the right pagination, they created a very nice API to just call a load more function and say which parameters need to be changed, and then it will just populate your component with more data, which is just a smooth sailing in your code, which is great. And then for the last one, we have the update and optimistic response. So there we go. That was the topic that was introduced at the start of the slide. And I'm going to see if I can cut my fingers showing you what that last thing is all about. So this is all for the future presentations. But we're going to dive into this one right now. Am I doing on time, by the way?
We still want the demo.
Okay, we still on the demo. Okay, that's good. It's always good to add this before you start a demo. Okay, so Apollo Optimistic UI, and I have to say I cheated a little bit. There's an excellent tutorial written on this subject. So I'm going to go through this tutorial to just show you a little bit of what is possible in this thing. We don't use this in production in our own applications yet, but this is something that's high on our list to actually do in a project sometime. All right, so let's see. We go back to the Vim interface because I did not ride the wave of switching to VS Code. So I know VS Code is better. Okay, I'm just very used to my Vim environment. All right, so maybe I can show the little application first. So it's not that exciting. We have a little to-do list. Wow, and if we add something to the to-do list, it shows up immediately. Well, this is the classic example. We're going to introduce some problems to this thing. So we're going to look at the code. This is the app.js. And the problem that I want to introduce is that if we go to the server code and we go to the resolvers. So maybe I'm not going to give a complete GraphQL workshop on how to set up this kind of things, but bear with me. You have these resolvers and you say we have some queries and we have some mutations. So for if you query the channels, it will actually just return what's now inside channels. If we look up inside channels, it's just a variable with some JSON in it. So it's not that fancy. There's no databases. It's very easy. Then we have the mutations over here, and the mutations is called add a channel, and it will create a new channel with the arguments that were passed. Add this to this fancy array that we saw before on top, and it returns the new channel. So we're going to introduce a little problem. So we have return sleep over here. So we're going to sleep the application for a couple of seconds before we return this data. We go back to the application and we try to add something new. Then it will take a second and then it will show. For some reason, I need to. Okay, so I add something and it takes a second for it. And this is a very natural case. If you're on a bad phone or you have slow internet or you have problems, congestion, a lot of traffic, this is stuff that happens all the time. You go into the subway or inside a tunnel and you lose your connection. So we want to fix this, or at least give a better user experience. So what the fine people of Apollo have thought of, so we go over to the client code and we go to the application. And what you can see inside this application is that we create an Apollo provider. And the Apollo provider is actually an Apollo client that gets a network interface. And the network interface is now the GraphQL server that we just saw in the other example, port 4000 on GraphQL. And this is passed as like the root component of your React app. So every component that's inside inherits these properties or is able to access these properties. So there's a channels list with data. Let's see what this thing is able to do. Channel list with data. So what is happening over here? We have a channels list, and in the end, it will render something, I guess. Channels list. And at the bottom, we see this GraphQL query again. So we see here a query. It requests the channels, and from the channels, it gets the ID and the name. At the bottom, we can see that this is actually where the link between the React component and the Apollo client happens. So what happens over here is we say GraphQL, we pass it the query that we did before. So this is the GraphQL query. And we pass some options, which I'm going to get into in a second. And we pass the component. So this is the part where we glue the Apollo client GraphQL magic to just plain old React component. So what is cool over here? Well, I'm going to go into that in a second. Let's see where I got the optimistic stuff. It's of course when adding something, right? So we have a component which is called add channel. That's the input field. And once we press enter after we've done something, we get into this handle key method, and we call this mutator. And this mutator is actually something that's passed from this Apollo wrapper outside of the component. It calls this mutate, and it gets some variables. So you can see we include the name, which is just the thing that was in the input, and then we have this update method, which is pretty cool. Internally, Apollo uses, it used to use relay with store and the way that they actually cache their data. I think they switched to like their own code now. I'm not completely sure about the specifics, but you have to think about this as Apollo keeps track of entities that you've requested before. And so what happens over here is we add this data, and we excuse me, we add this data to the local store. So what's cool about this update method is that it's being called twice, namely when we enable this optimistic response part. This update function is called twice. So once the moment you press enter, this update call is used with the thing that you return inside this optimistic response. So the update part is the part that when you retrieve data, it will add it to the store. And I need to explain this properly. And the first time it's called, it will use the result of the thing that you're returning inside this optimistic response. So inside the optimistic response, we have an add channel, and the name that we're returning to this update method is actually the same value that we were sending to the server. And the ID is of course being generated by the server. So we don't know this ID because it takes a while for the server to return this ID. So we're just going to think of an ID that we made up ourselves. And the nice part is we made it negative, so we can actually easily check in the interface if it's a fake ID or if it's a real ID. So the first time we press enter, the update call is triggered, and it will use the data from add channel. So the first time it will actually use our fake object over here. So we save this. Sorry? Ja, die zag ik eerder ook al. That's because I did not update my Vim configuration to understand this. So we have this GraphQL syntax over here. So this should all be fine. We'll see about this in a second. So if I add something now, then you can see that it will immediately add it. And what I did not see if you saw the contrast, but it immediately gets added with a dark contrast. And once the server returns, the update is called again, but now with the result that actually came back from the server. So maybe this is makes sense? Yeah. Okay, that's good. All right, so the third one barely made it. Sorry? So what if it goes wrong? The update call is still called, and you get a result from the server that something went wrong. So you got an error, and then at that moment you can decide what happened. So you can say, I pop up with the toast and say something went wrong, and maybe remove this fake entry from my list, or you could say something went wrong and I put it in a queue or something, so I can resolve this later. So you can basically decide yourself what you want to do at this moment.
Because on the front end, you could be in a whole different state, so you don't know if you can show it again or destroy something.
Yeah, that's true. And then it gets really complicated with like concurrency things and multiple people doing the same thing on the server side.
Yeah,
That's true.
handling it fine for you is tricky.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, but I just like the idea a lot that you're able to make a much more snappier interface also when you're on a very slow phone or very slow internet connection. All right, let's see. So I will share the presentation so you can look at the examples for yourself. Then we have the timer going on. We need to get out of here. So the takeaways that you saw here, we still bind the GraphQL data to the components, only a little bit on a lower level. So in the end, in the first example, we do the same thing, but we just wrap it with another component. Oh, we did the options to cache and pull the data. Oh, that's
Can we
yeah,
do
we
that
go
for
back.
next time?
Yeah. We'll leave it for next time. But it's actually the options that you saw before. You can just enable these. Yeah, enable these, and they will then pull the server for new information. Update and optimistic response for instant user feedback, and it. Well, as we said in the question before, also works for React Native mobile development, which is very delightful if you're able to use this already. So that's it. Thanks so much.
So I think now I have one more reason I want to do a project together. So let's use this stuff in our content. We ran a bit over time, so I'm going for the top one question for the audience, and they can ask the rest during the break. Is there anyone? Yes.
Yeah, please. I have two just quick ones. The first one is like, you guys saying that you are using Apollo. Why you are not using Relay Model or GraphQL? Or the second one is like, how is the team feeling when you need to work with Redux and now you need to migrate to Apollo?
Okay, so I have maybe a bit of a lame answer to this question.
Yeah.
Before we went into Apollo, we also took a look at Relay and Redux, and to be really frank, I found it not fitting. I found it too complex and too much boilerplate to fit our use cases. So in the kind of applications that we create, we did not find the need to have like all these actions, transducers, like all this boilerplate go to have this store and fill everything in. Was just not the thing that we needed to get our application structured. So in the end, we just chose Apollo to do all the data fetching for each of the components itself, and we actually did not have to migrate at all because we never used it in our team. Yeah, we still have to see the first people coming in with a lot of Relay and Redux knowledge that have to adjust then maybe to the way that we do, or convince us that it's actually even better to do it in Relay and Redux. But the fact that that Apollo used Relay under the hood already, and already handled a lot of the features that you could get from this, like the caching and this optimistic responses, was for us enough reason to just stick with this, not make it any more complicated than it already is. All right. Yeah. Thanks. All right.
Dankjewel. Yes.